Hi, welcome to Goldie Show. I'm back again with Dr. Morrow. It's a pleasure to have you back again on my show.
It's always a pleasure.
It is. But this time the topic is totally different.
Indeed.
And it is a very hot topic. It's about ISIS.
Yes.
Let's start with the explanation of what exactly ISIS stands for.
What does ISIS stand for? Well, ISIS claims to stand for Islam. In reality, it stands for the opposite of Islam. They present themselves as Islamic when in fact they are truly, completely and totally anti-Islamic. They claim to fight for Islam, but through their actions, they are actually destroying Islam.
When you say destroying Islam, okay, and you explained it's not related to ISIS, how did ISIS come about? The foundation, who started it, who is the main, like a president we have, and then the cabinets fall? Who set that up?
Well, we would have to go back in history. We would have to go back about 1,400 years to look at the actual root of this ideology. There are several elements. The first would be the Nawasib. Now, the Nawasib were a group of people who hated the household of the Prophet.
Okay.
After the Prophet's death, a group of his companions believed that the elders of the community should decide who the leader would be. They came to be known as the Sunnis. There was another group who believed that the Prophet had appointed Ali as his successor, and they eventually came to be the Shiites. There was one branch that was vehemently opposed to the household of the Prophet and his descendants, and they were known as the Nawasib, or the haters of the Prophet's family. So if you look at the ideology of ISIS, they have elements from the Nawasib. They also have some ideas that come from the Kharijites, or the Khawarij. And so I explained that the Muslim community split in two during the early decades of Islam into the Sunnis and the Shiites. There was another group called the Khawarij, or the Kharijites, who insisted that both the Sunnis and the Shiites were infidels, and they were non-Muslims, and that their blood was halal, their blood was legal to shed. And so these are the first people in the history of Islam to do what is known as takfir, which means to excommunicate a person, to say that they are not Muslims and that it is legal to kill them. So they have some components from these two different groups. The other group would be the Wahhabis. And this is a movement started by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab in what is now Arabia, Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, who appeared on the scene about 200 years ago, developed an interpretation, or a misinterpretation of Islam called, pejoratively Wahhabism. They prefer to describe themselves as Salafis, or Salafism. They claim to follow in the footsteps of the pious predecessors. And following in the footsteps of the Nawasib and the Kharijites, he revived this idea that the Muslim community had left Islam. And so the Wahhabis believed that the Muslim masses, the overwhelming majority of Muslims, had returned to the period of Jahiliyyah, or the period of ignorance, that they were no longer Muslims, which meant that their blood was permissible in war, that their women could be enslaved and trafficked, and that they could rob and loot their belongings. And so, he offered this, this ideology to these followers. And who did they fight? Well, they fought the Ottomans. You see, during this period of time, this is the period of colonization and so on, Islam is still a major political player in the world. Islam is a strong political force with the Ottoman Empire. And the Europeans, especially the British, set out to destroy and dismantle the Muslim world by weakening it from within.
But when you say the British world and they're trying to destroy the Muslim, community, yes, or this, but How about they did that? Why are they doing that? Are they trying to throw people off by doing that, or they're trying to create problem by doing
So
that?
yes, so what you do is you divide in order to conquer. And so during that period of time, there was no such thing as national identity. The Arabs at best had tribal identity. And so the British spread this idea that you people are a nation and that you deserve to have your own country.
Okay.
And at the same time, they were telling the Armenians that they should have their own country, and the Assyrians that they should have their own countries, and promoting separatism and all these different independent movements. And so they told these Arabs that, listen, why should Turks be ruling over you? And they don't follow the real Islam. And so the British used these religious extremists, these fanatics, these Wahhabis, in order to weaken, destroy, and dismantle the Ottoman Empire. And eventually they succeeded in doing so. And as a result, you had the creation of this new nation state known as Saudi Arabia. Okay? And so the monarchy from the very beginning has existed side by side with these extreme religious fanatics. And this also coincides with the discovery of oil and so on in Saudi Arabia. These people become extremely rich and powerful, and so they start to disseminate this ideology throughout the Muslim world. And so they start spreading it through a network of universities that they founded all over. And many Muslims have traditionally gone to Arabia to study Islam in Mecca or in Medina. And so they went there and they learned this new, right? To me, it is not Islam. It's an aberration of Islam. It's a corruption of Islam. But Muslims have this emotional connection to the Holy Land, to Mecca and Medina, and they assume that the Islam being taught there is true Islam, when in reality, this was not true Islam. And so they brought this ideology back to India, to other parts of the Muslim world, you had different movements like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which followed this Salafi Wahhabi movement. You have other groups in Palestine, in Syria, in India, and so on, all trying to overthrow different governments. This leads us to the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. And what did the Americans do? So if in the past it was the British and the French and the Germans who were using these extremist religious fanatics for their own geopolitical aims, now the Americans came to the scene. The Americans are the new superpower. And so they organized these people to go fight in Afghanistan. All of these Arab Salafis and Wahhabis to go to Afghanistan to wage jihad in order to fight the infidel Russians, okay? So, but you have infidel Americans using so-called Muslim fanatics to fight Russian infidels, okay? So this is very dangerous. When you have, when you're training attack dogs and pit bulls and Rottweilers, okay? That poses a risk because these dangerous animals can turn against you. And they did turn against the United States. In 2001, September 11th, when the very same people that they had been supporting and they had been financing in Afghanistan lashed back. Okay, and they bit their master who had, trained them and supported them and funded them.
So you're
and
trying
fed them.
to tell me ISIS was created by us?
Yes, directly and indirectly. So you had the situation in Afghanistan where the United States was supporting these extremists. They also used them in Bosnia. They used them in Kosovo. They used them in Chechnya in order to try to destabilize Russia. So they've used them in many parts of the world. They've used them in the Philippines. So what you're dealing with are their proxy wars. Okay, so the Americans are not going to confront the Russians directly. They will do it by means of a third party. So in Latin America, you had all of these death squads that were trained by the CIA in the School of the Americas and so on. They committed all kinds of atrocities in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, in Honduras, and other parts of Latin America. So they were using these right-wing death squads in Latin America, and in the Muslim world, they were using these so-called Islamic fundamentalist, extremist, terrorist types to destabilize countries. So we have the United States then, after September 11th, who decide that we're going to blame Saddam Hussein. And people forget that now, that was the reason that the country was invaded. Saddam Hussein, who was a secular military dictator from the Ba'ath Party, right, who had socialist inclinations. This was not a religious man. He wasn't identified with Islam in any form or fashion. And they're blaming him for the actions of what a group of Saudis, the overwhelming majority of them are Saudis, were Saudis who were involved in the attack against the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and so on. So they attack Iraq, they devastate the country, they kill over 1 million people, according to the statistics from the United Nations, both due to direct carpet bombing and the consequences of military action, all of the diseases due to depleted uranium, starvation, malnutrition, and so on. So over 1 million people die. And it created a vacuum. And in this vacuum, these radical Islamists started to organize themselves in order, allegedly, to fight the American occupation. But soon it wasn't just an issue of fighting the American occupation, they were fighting the government. Because if Iraq had been overwhelmingly controlled by these Sunni Arabs, it was now in the hands of the majority of the population, the Shia of Iraq, and so they were at war against the government of their own country. It was these people. There was a group called At-Tawheed, led by a man by the name of Zarqawi, who started all of these bombings in order to destabilize the country. And there was no military rhyme or reason for his attacks. It was just to create an environment of chaos in order to destroy the morale of the government and the people. So they started blowing up farmers' markets and just blowing up religious gatherings and blowing up people who were going to the mosque for prayer. So they set out to create a sectarian war between the Sunnis and between the Shias. And it was this group at Tawheed that evolved into Daesh or ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant.
Now let me ask you about the ISIS again.
Yes.
Going back to that. Now ISIS, most of them say they hire children and women and stuff like that. Some of these children don't have the idea of technology. The women don't have the idea or how to use the weapon or the technology. So why are they saying that ISIS tells women to do that? Is it because money is involved, or the family's been bought out, or it's just a game? Because they don't have no idea of technology. Woman doesn't know much. Yes, women are intelligent, those men doesn't understand me.
Yes.
Because women have the power to change a lot of things. But children, how is this coming about that ISIS is using innocent children and women now? Men have been shifted a bit, but now they're targeting women and children. Why?
You're talking about the women and children in Syria and Iraq?
No, ISIS...
Or the ones that they're drawing from abroad?
Abroad, anywhere where they can get hands on. ISIS is trying to recruit women and children. Is it because women are emotional or they are weak, and the children, they don't know? So why are they targeting these innocent lives to take lives?
They're targeting these people because they're vulnerable. ISIS is not just an ordinary terrorist group. It operates like a corporation. It has its own brand, right? So they're involved in what's called corporate branding, always associating the seal of the prophet with their atrocities and so on. So they target people who are alienated, If you look at the profile of the people that they've recruited in the West to go fight for them, you find that there isn't a single profile. There are some of them who are like these radical Salafists who are committed to this ideology, who go abroad, who are like religiously minded people. You have others who are just seeking, who are motivated by a sense of adventure, that this is exciting and so on. And you have some, young girls who have these romantic notions of holy war and so on, and they'll go there and they'll marry some type of holy warrior. But the reality is, when they go there, all of their freedoms are limited. They're forced to cover themselves from head to toe. They're not allowed outside of their home without a direct relative. They're coerced into marriages with older men, and often these marriages do not last very long, and they're just passed from one jihadi to another jihadi. If they try to leave, they're accused of being apostates. Some have been beaten to death. They've been executed as a result of that. And so, they think they're going to some utopia. And when they get there, they soon realize that it's a dystopia. But if we look at these people, some of them are drawn from the criminal class. You find a lot of them, they were just like thugs and, drug dealers and petty criminals and so on. And so those type of people, if you tell them, wow, you can just kill at random and get away with it, what do you mean I could like rape women and traffic women and like enslave women? For some sick, twisted, demented people, wow, this is a wonderful opportunity. So off they go. And others are simply mercenaries. They are there for the money. Okay? When you had all these revolutions in Latin America with Che Guevara and so on, these people didn't receive salaries. They were fighting for a cause. They were committed to social justice, okay? They wanted Marxism, they wanted socialism, they wanted equality, and so on. So they were committed to the cause. ISIS fighters are paid, and some of them are paid, comparatively speaking, exorbitant amounts, especially their commanders. There are many people fighting for ISIS who are not even Muslims. They come from the Balkans. They are people who were involved with the militias and so on in the military in Croatia, in Serbia, and other countries. If you look at the amount of fighters, foreign fighters in ISIS, according to some of the latest statistics I looked at, there are about 40,000 foreign fighters. And if you look at, how many people are actually fighting for ISIS, their actual forces, some people say there's 40,000 of them, okay? So it's 80% of them or 100% of them who are foreigners. There are some who say, well, there's 100,000 of them. But even so, it's a disproportionate amount of people who are actually foreigners. These people are not Syrians. They are not fighting for Syria. They're not fighting for the Syrian people. And they're certainly not fighting for Islam, because who are they killing? According to some statistics, they've killed over 200,000 Muslims over the past few years. They spend most of their time just terrorizing local populations and picking on the poor and the weak. So it's definitely a sickening situation.
When you say foreigners are involved and the ISIS are over there, then why do these foreigners, are they trained to say Allahu Akbar? And they say that, okay, it says in the Quran that ISIS says that if we kill, we will go to heaven and we'll have a peaceful life. Is that what they have embedded in the foreigners? Or is it the story that the media is carrying it?
Well, they use some sophisticated brainwashing techniques.
Okay.
They target, young people who are alienated. These are people quite often who do not come from religious families. Their only understanding of Islam comes from the internet. So you find some of these people, they were, if you look at these terrorists who were involved in these attacks in Paris, you'll find one, he was disowned even by, his father said that he himself would have killed his son had he known he was going to commit these atrocities. He was so disgusted by his actions. This was a young man who was married, who didn't work, who was on welfare, who used to spend all of his time at home smoking hashish, and according to some sources, he'd spend his nights in gay bars and so on. And all of a sudden,
Wow.
you know, a couple of weeks after, this guy is some type of jihadist, you know, some holy warrior, you know, some pious Muslim. It's ridiculous. The other girl who was implicated in this was known for, you know, being a hard-drinking, hard-partying girl who was sexually promiscuous. And all of a sudden, she's wearing a niqab. She's covered from head to toe. She's wearing a suicide belt. You know, she's involved in these guys on these suicide missions. It's all very suspicious. Okay, it's all very, very unusual, which is why some people suggest that at least some of these attacks were actually false flag operations.
What about the recent attack in California? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, even the FBI admits that virtually all the information that was disseminated through the mass media was false. That it wasn't true that they were radicalized on the internet. It wasn't true that they were posting, you know, extremist messages. It's not true that in the middle of this massacre she pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. All of the information coming from the mass media, all of this hysteria is not based on facts. There are witnesses who insist, and they continue to insist, that this attack was committed by 3 white men who were very built, okay? People associated perhaps with some paramilitary group. So again, the investigation is not complete, all right? We shouldn't jump to any conclusions. We have to analyze all of the facts and all the information to come to a conclusion. So whether they were involved or they were not involved, this has absolutely nothing to do with Islam. In Islam, we are not allowed to kill civilians. We do not kill men, women, and children. This is not to say that Islam is a religion of peace, okay? That would be like saying Christianity is a religion of peace and that all Christians are peaceful. Are the Americans Christians? Yes. The French are Christians? Yes. You know, Vladimir Putin, is he a Christian? Yes. These are all Christian nations. The Spaniards, you know, are Christians. All of these people have been engaged in wars and quite often in the name of Christianity. So yes, Islam is a religion of peace, but also Islam is a religion of war. If you are being persecuted, if you are being oppressed, if there's injustice, then you have the right to protect yourself, to defend yourself. So there is just war and there is war that is unjust. So yes, it's important to clarify these matters.
But why ISIS has become such a hot topic? Why are they constantly saying ISIS, ISIS, and the word ISIS? Does it have a meaning at all to this word ISIS? You know, jihad, you say, okay, jihad. But ISIS to mean is nothing. I mean,
well, ISIS,
you know?
It's just the acronym for the Islamic State in Iraq and Shem, or in Iraq and Syria. It's an acronym, yes.
And the people that are actually, you said, on the top, and they're corporate and this and that, who chooses the person that is in charge of ISIS group? Like, you know, over here we vote for president. We select our president. Who selects the head of ISIS?
Well, I mean, their current leader is this guy by the name of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Okay.
And so he was involved with this group from the very beginning. And so he's been leading it since then. I mean, he has other people around him. And I'm sure that, you know, this cadre of people would elect someone else or nominate someone in the event something would happen to him. But, you know, you deal with this issue of ISIS, and we're being bombarded with this, and like terrorism and Muslims, and all Muslims are a threat. Now it's not just all Muslims are a threat, all immigrants are a threat, right? So, you know, entire communities are being demonized. What we are witnessing is propaganda, and it's very reminiscent of the propaganda we saw during the time of Hitler. If you compare the ads and the rhetoric and so on, what they were saying about the Jews are a threat to Germany, the Jews are taking over, all of this, yes, they're infiltrating everything. They're saying the same thing. Muslims are invading, they're taking over, they're a threat to our security. We shouldn't let any Muslims in the country. There are some people who are openly musing about putting Muslims in internment camps like they did with the Japanese during the Second World War. We have Mr. Trump, who is proposing that we should have a registry, register Muslims just like they register Jews. Oh, and people in Germany said, even the Jewish people said, oh, they're not going to do this. It's impossible that it's going to happen, but it did happen, and it could happen. And I'm not naive that we are at a critical juncture in the history of this country. You have half of the population in the United States who are secular liberals, and the other half are, they're the Christian equivalent of ISIS. They are, radical Christian extremists. And if you consult with the FBI, if you speak to people in law enforcement, who represents the greatest threat to safety and security in the United States of America? Is it really Muslims? No. 0.001% of Muslims are terrorists, okay? So you're looking at about 100,000 people, most of whom are in Syria and Iraq at the moment, some of them in Nigeria and Afghanistan. So 99.9% of Muslims are peaceful, law-abiding citizens. And so when you put all Muslims in the same category as this tiny minority, it is absolutely unfair. When the Israeli Defense Forces kill thousands of civilians, when they blow up schools and they blow up hospitals in occupied Palestine, you don't see Muslims putting all Jews in the same boat. And when you see the military government in Burma, okay, who've revoked the citizenship of the Burmese Muslims, who have placed them in these essentially concentration camps for generations. We don't turn, and who commit pogroms against Muslims. We don't turn around and blame all Buddhists for the crimes of those people. So you can't blame all Muslims for the crimes committed by a minute minority who professes to act in the name of the religion while soiling everything it stands for. And so if you look at the statistics in the United States, the overwhelming majority of terrorist attacks are committed by non-Muslims. Well over 94% of them are committed by non-Muslims. About 30% by these Christians, white supremacists. And when I say Christian, I'm using it in quotation marks because they're not real Christians.
No. Yep.
Okay? So comparing, ISIS to Islam is like comparing the Klan to Christianity. It's like comparing Timothy McVeigh. Have you all forgotten the Oklahoma City bombing? Hundreds of people butchered by this so-called Christian white supremacist. And there's 6% of terrorist acts in the United States are committed by self-professed Muslims, but 7% are committed by Zionist terrorists, okay, like the Jewish Defense League, who go around beating Muslim activists and Palestinian activists, people who will attack mosques and so on. There's Latino terrorists, there's eco-terrorists, people who will attack, mining operations and logging operations and so on.
But let me tell you this, you're getting all these figures and facts, which is great, but why have they picked ISIS? Why are they saying ISIS?
It's very convenient. You can kill two birds with one stone. You can try to overthrow Assad, for example, and other governments using these people, and at the same time you destroy the image of Islam as a world religion. And so, they get 2 times the benefit. Right?
Is there ISIS in dictionary? If I open a dictionary, will I find the word ISIS and a meaning in there?
Well, you'll find it's the name of a goddess, but I'm sure you'll find that the acronym in the latest dictionary, the latest version of the dictionary, of course, there'll be an entry for ISIS. Yeah.
Wow. So if someone walks up or someone goes and says, I'm an ISIS to you, I belong to ISIS, would it make you like crunch, or would you get afraid or?
Well, I don't think anyone would walk up to me and say I'm a member of ISIS.
You never know.
Well, anyhow, I'm not afraid of those people. Those people should be afraid of people like me. And those people should be afraid of God Almighty.
That's
because
true.
they will face judgment and they will be punished. Because they have violated the teachings of the Quran, they have violated the teachings of the Prophet, they have violated the covenants of the Prophet in which he granted protection, he granted rights and privileges to the Christian communities of the Middle East. Yes.
So ISIS has got nothing to do with religion or Muslim, basically.
No, absolutely not.
So why are people connecting these two together?
Well, you can't necessarily.
Again, I'm going back to that.
You can't necessarily blame people if they look at the media and all of this reporting and all this sensationalism and all this hysteria. Yes, I mean, it's I mean, that's the image that they are getting of Islam, and it's a choice. If you work for a television station, if you work for a newspaper, I mean, some people are under the impression that you have freedom, you can write anything you want. It doesn't work that way, okay? That's how it was a long, long time ago. At one point, there were like 2,000 independent media outlets in the United States, and then that was consolidated down to about 200, and over the past couple of decades, there's maybe 3 or 4 major players. So there's 3 or 4 people who decide, okay, what they're going to put on the news and in newspapers. And if you're a journalist or a reporter, you must follow the editorial line. If you, like, we're pro-Israel. If you write something that's pro-Palestinian, they're not going to publish it, you're going to get fired. That's how it works, okay? So forget about this nonsense about, academic objectivity and so on in the media. It's very, very biased. And so there's a small segment of the population that is behind this narrative. And so why would they be behind this narrative? It is obviously for political reasons. Yes.
Okay. Now that we've discussed about ISIS, you told me where it originated, who is funding it, and it's a big corporation, and it's not all Muslims, and 99.9% they're not Muslims, they're all foreigners and all. What kind of a message you can relate to our society now over here about ISIS and what they should understand about the group itself? Well, if they are groups.
Well, I think what they need to understand is that ISIS doesn't represent Islam. They represent a tiny minority. They belong to... if you look at anyone who's committed a suicide bombing, you will find one thing in common, that they were all Salafis, okay? They call themselves Salafis. The people who don't like them call them Wahhabis. They're also known as Takfiris or excommunicators. They're people who believe that they are the only true Muslims and all other Muslims are non-Muslims. They're all infidels and apostates, okay? Now, they represent a tiny little, percentage of the Muslim community. Now, of course, they claim to be Muslims. They claim to be, to represent true Islam. But true Islam is the Islam of the majority. It is the traditional Islam that has been transmitted over the past 1,400 years, not this twisted, ideology that traces back, 200 years and was created by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. So I would point people to true traditional Islam. And yes, I mean, you are dealing with what is, on the one hand, true Islam and what is fake Islam, right?
Wow, I didn't know there was a fake and real Muslims, but...
Well, it's like the same thing. I mean, you have real Jews and you have fake Jews, right? And you have real Christians and you have fake Christians. So, these Christians who are burning down African-American churches, these Christians who are burning down, Muslim mosques, I'm sorry to break the news to you, you are not Christians.
Oh, wow.
And so I say the very same thing to those Muslims who commit acts of terrorism and who slaughter civilians. They are outside of the fold of Islam.
The most hypothetical question is, how can Muslims all over the world, even in the United States, what kind of a role they can play or how can they get involved, Muslims and non-Muslims, to fight against ISIS or to create a vacuum so that they cannot go forward with what they're doing?
Well, it's an excellent question. The problem is we're a very small minority. We're 1% of the population, or less than 1% of the population. We don't control television stations, radio stations, the printed media. So it is very difficult for our voice to be heard. This is not so. Non-Muslims get the impression that Muslims are not denouncing extremism and radicalization, fanaticism and terrorism and so on. When in reality, you would be hard-pressed to find any mosque in the country or any imam who hasn't denounced these people. And of course they would, because we are the ones who are suffering the backlash as a result of these actions that are being attributed to us. So, from the pulpit of every mosque, you've heard imams denounce extremism. We started this Covenants Initiative in which we called upon Muslims to renew their pledge to the Prophet that they would protect the Christians of the Middle East. So it's an international movement of Muslims to protect Christians throughout the Muslim world. We had hundreds of leading Muslim scholars and activists who signed the Covenants Initiative. Then we started this Genocide Initiative, which was open to everyone, Muslims and non-Muslims, and in which we were pressuring all political players to denounce the crimes of ISIS as acts of genocide, and that would trigger a series of consequences, through the United Nations and the international community. There should be no rest for the wicked. Okay? We want to make sure that these people are brought to justice. We want them to be like Nazi war criminals. That even, if you think you're going to go there and commit these atrocities and, slaughter entire villages and rape women and traffic women, crucify people, drown them, burn them alive, throw them off buildings and so on, okay, you're not going to get away with this, all right? Because you're going to be bombed into oblivion. You will be destroyed. Your infrastructure will be destroyed. And then you're going to have to flee. You're going to have to escape somewhere. But we're going to be after you. We're going to be hunting you down. We don't care if you're 70, 80 years old. You're going to live with that fear. You're going to be looking over your shoulder, okay? That we will bring you to justice for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and you will spend the rest of your days in a prison cell, in the best of countries, or in other countries, you will be executed. You will face the death penalty. And that's not the end of your worries, because you will face judgments.
Wow, well said, well said. I mean, you've acknowledged so much. You've enlightened me with what ISIS is today, and it's a hot topic, but it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and you have enlightened me and enlightened all my studio people out there. All the citizens of America now know what ISIS is and how it is connected. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Privilege.
And thank you, audience, for watching Goldie's show. Khudafis.